You are listening to the Yoga for Balance podcast. I'm your host, Heather Jurdy. Thank you for listening. Whether this is your first episode tuning in or you've been here all along, I really appreciate you listening. And even if you've listened to just a few, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day, out of your week to listen and learn and hopefully uncover something about yourself on your own journey to healing, because that is what this is all about. As a yoga teacher, I'm based here in San Diego, California. I just constantly am reminded of that this is a path and practice and lifestyle to help people find their own path of healing and to live their best life. And I love that so much. It's so empowering. And this week's conversation is really empowering. I speak with Katya Lovejoy, who is also based here in San Diego, in North County, San Diego. And we talk about so much on this show. Katya is a clinical hypnotherapist with degrees in neuroscience and clinical social work. She is also trained and certified in heart-centered hypnotherapy, yoga nidra, breathwork, and Reiki energy healing. And we'll dive deep today in what yoga nidra is to introduce you to that practice, as well as an introduction to hypnotherapy and what that might look like on your healing journey, as well as the other incredible work that Katya has dove deep into and dedicated her career to in sharing this with others and helping them to heal. Katya says she only shares things with others that she has herself found to be powerful on her own path. And I think that is so huge, that when we can share from that place of wisdom and true knowing, something that we've experienced in our own bodies, it's only that much more powerful. So she shares a little more about that, about her own path, and really opens up in this week's episode. So thank you, Katya, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. But before we dive in too deep, I'd love to, again, start out this week. Let's take 2 big, deep breaths together. Inhale to fill your belly and your chest all the way up. Sigh, let it go. Take one more big belly breath. Fill all the way to the top of your chest. Exhale, let it go. Find a smile, why not? And enjoy this week's episode. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to the Yoga for Balance podcast, or online at vintantra.com, vintantra.com. Katya Lovejoy.
It is not my given name. I started my first company when I did my yoga teacher training in 2011, and it was called Yoga for Transformation. And I had quit a master's in social work at that point. Halfway through, I already had a degree in neuroscience, so I was coming at yoga from a very clinical perspective, and I really appreciated the science behind it. And so the name Yoga for Transformation felt, a bit clinical. And I was at the time teaching yoga at an organization for survivors of domestic violence. And I and another teacher were invited to speak to a group on how yoga can be healing for trauma. And this was before I even knew I wanted to be a trauma-focused practitioner. But I spoke first, and I sounded really smart, and I talked about the brain and the nervous system, and, everybody got the facts, and they're like, yeah, okay, cool. The woman who spoke after me, she really spoke from her heart and from her own personal experience. She did not have the education that I have, and it didn't matter. She still touched people in a much deeper way. And at that moment, I realized that I was coming at this transformation too much from the head and needed to really drop into the heart. Around that time, my father was diagnosed with cancer and was in his transitionary period. And he had grown up going to Lovejoy Pond in Maine. And he actually moved to Maine in his retirement to the same town that that pond is in. And in fact, we've actually scattered his ashes at that pond. So the name Lovejoy has always been very special in our family. It's always meant like a retreat and peace and, of course, love and joy. So as he was transitioning and I was finding this new perspective for my work, I thought, let me honor my father by calling my company Lovejoy Wellness. And it just so happened I couldn't buy that domain name. I could only buy Katya Lovejoy. And I thought, oh, okay, that sounds nice. I'm going to do it. So now I'm Katya Lovejoy.
I love that. Such a beautiful
story
story.
of the name. Yeah.
That is beautiful. And that already started kind of going into then your experience of yoga and how you started incorporating it. So like you said, you kind of came from a little bit of the head and then you started feeling it in the heart. So yeah, what is your current experience of yoga? Is it something you use regularly? It looks like in your work, in your personal life?
Yeah, wow. My journey with yoga has been a long one and quite diverse. Um, I'm feeling more that I need to get back to asana lately, and back into the body. But what really compels me and excites me, and what I teach primarily when I'm teaching is yoga nidra. So I'm not sure how many of your listeners are familiar with yoga nidra. Some people are like totally gung ho, and then others have never heard of it. And that was actually the case when I moved here about 4.5 years ago and started teaching yoga nidra. People didn't seem to know what it was. And that was surprising to me because it was such an integral part of my training in New York. And it's just opened so much for me. It really appeals to my scientific side because yoga nidra is a guided meditation that's really a systematic process of moving through the different koshas, or the different bodies, the different layers of a human being, and releasing tension from all of those layers so that we can relax at the deepest level, expand our awareness, and there's so much healing potential when we can drop into the hypnagogic state, which is really where we're going in yoga nidra, that place in between being awake and being asleep. Salvador Dali called it the sleep with a door, or sleep as the doorway to creativity. I think I'm butchering that quote, but that's really our doorway to creativity, to intuition, to even a spiritual experience, not just understanding. So what I love about yoga is the integrative aspect of it. It's not just studying the sutras, because you could read every book on the planet, and until you really experience it in your body, then it's not sustainable and it's not integrated. There's a beautiful quote, and I heard it actually on the Netflix show, The OA, so I don't know who to attribute it to. But in the first season, one of the characters says, knowledge is just a rumor until it lives in the body. And I love that. It just hits me so deep every time I hear it or say it.
Yeah,
And
that's
yeah, that's just basically what pulls me to yoga, as opposed to more traditional forms of therapy, which I am trained in. And I like really bringing it together because we really do need that experiential aspect.
Yeah, and that's perfect you brought up yoga nidra, because we did just start talking about different styles of yoga. I think when you first come to yoga, you think of asana and maybe the one class you've taken. You don't realize how many different layers there are and how many different ways to approach the practice and the lifestyle. So this is perfect to talk about that a little bit more. And the koshas, I think we haven't talked about that on the show yet either. So I'd love if you could tell the audience, if they haven't heard of these different bodies, explain that a little bit more.
Yeah. Before I go into that, I want to speak to what you just said. It's so true that we come to this practice here in the West really from the physical aspect, the asana. And I know for me, I was kind of limited for many years just in that. I didn't know more. And I think that has something to do with our culture, just our culture here in the West being very action oriented and a lot about productivity. So we don't necessarily, we're not in the beginning necessarily open to the subtler practices that help to deepen our awareness. But as a practitioner continues on the journey, we tend to find, these deeper practices, and it really opens things up for us. So typically we're operating in the world just really aware of our mind and our body. And I will say that most people are disassociated from their body because of some level of trauma. I believe that all humans have trauma. I believe being a human is a traumatic experience, and we all have different degrees of that. But we are a human being, and we're also a spiritual being, but that disconnect can be very painful. And so I think people tend to not really be aware of their body walking through their daily yogi for 10 years and thought I was so embodied. Oh, I'm a yoga teacher. I'm in my body. And it wasn't until I started doing deeper trauma work, specifically hypnotherapy, trauma hypnotherapy, that I realized, wow, I disassociate a lot. And so the average person is, I think, mostly aware of their mind. And by the way, just the conscious part of their mind, which is only 10% of the experience, and somewhat the body. But in yoga philosophy, the koshas tell us that there's actually 5 different layers or bodies that we have. We have our physical body. We also have our mental body, which is related to emotions. We have our pranic body, or our energy body. We have our wisdom body, which holds a lot of our unconscious and subconscious programming. And then we have what the yogis call the bliss body, which is the closest to source and where we can really access universal wisdom, and is closest to our true nature, which is universal consciousness. And, God has been called many different things in many different traditions. But what I love about yoga, or tantric yoga, which is the lineage from which Yoga Nidra comes, and even shamanic work and hypnotherapy, is that we call God universal consciousness. And since we as humans have consciousness, we can use that as a bridge to reach those expanded states of bliss, of peace, of wisdom, of love. So that's a deeper understanding of these yogic practices. And really, I would say most of my Yoga Nidra students, apart from the ones that I train to facilitate Yoga Nidra, don't know about the koshas, and they don't need to know, right? We don't have to know it to have this practice work for us. But I do love geeking out on the philosophy of it and the energetics, because we're so vast. We're such vast beings. It's amazing. And when we start doing these practices and really, again, not just knowing it, but understanding it in a felt way, wow, does it expand life.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, experiencing it. The wisdom comes and the transformation comes when you really start to experience it and feel it for yourself. And so for Yoga Nidra, would that always be right before? So I know you're getting into this sleep-like state, like you said, it's this access point. Would you do that always before going to bed, or could you do it midday to just enter that state and then come back out of it? How typically would someone practice that?
Absolutely. What a great question. It's such a versatile practice that you can do it at multiple points of the day for different intentions. So, a lot of people do come to Yoga Nidra to help with insomnia. Again, this is like the access point, just like asana is often the access point for people to get into yoga. And then they discover, wow, this wealth of, pathways and just juiciness that's there. Same with Yoga Nidra. Like, we come to it to help us with sleep, but then, oh, wow, it can help us with chronic pain and anxiety and mood balance and even, healing on deep, deep levels. So it can be used to help you to fall asleep. It can also be used as a replacement for sleep. So I used to teach a class at 8:30 p.m. and that was great. My students loved it because it really helps them to let go of the tension from the day so that the sleep that they get is very restorative. Now I teach at 2 p.m. and my students love that too because you get that kind of dip in the middle of the day and it's a pick me up, and they say that 20 minutes of yoga nidra equals 4 hours of sleep. So it can be used both to help you go to sleep as well as a replacement for sleep. Not saying that you shouldn't sleep, but if, life gets crazy, maybe you're a new mom or you're in school and you're cramming. I mean, my teacher, Mona Anand, who is a Yoga Nidra master from Ishta Yoga in New York, she's from India and she always told us that that's how she learned of yoga nidra. Well, they just do it there. It's not really a separate thing. But she was in university and would be cramming and would need to recharge her brain and get a little bit of rest. And then so she would do the yoga nidra, and it was like 4 hours of sleep.
Wow, that's really powerful.
It's so powerful because when we're typically just laying down to fall asleep, we haven't done the practices to release the tension from, again, all those levels. So we're running tension still, even though we've dropped under the level of conscious awareness. So if you can prepare for sleep by clearing out all the blocks to deep relaxation, then it becomes more restorative. And what's happening is that you're like all the prana that was wrapped up in mental tension, physical tension, emotional tension becomes neutralized and released, so then it can actually do the healing for your body and your mind and your spirit, because we have a natural healing script in our body. And yoga is not about becoming something. It's about peeling away the layers to return, because we have truly everything that we need. Our bodies are meant to regenerate. But because we live in such a stressful environment, that tends to get in the way. So Yoga Nidra can be really profound in terms of healing chronic and degenerative illnesses, specifically that are stress related, which really we know is most illnesses.
Yeah. And you partner that with some other healing modalities, and your experience is so vast. So I'd love you to talk a little more about the work you do. So you'll pair that with sound healing. What can an experience like that do for someone?
Yeah. One of my favorite experiences that I offer is Yoga Nidra with binaural beats. So binaural beats are sound technology that needs to be delivered through headphones. So we use wireless headphones for the event. And the reason for that is because each ear receives a slightly different frequency of sound. And that discrepancy, what that does for the brain is that it synchronizes the two hemispheres of the brain. And we know from yoga and from science that one side of the brain is typically more activated at any given time, and I mean, we're always using both sides of the brain, but one is more dominant and then it switches back and forth. And this is why we do practices like Nadi Shodhana or other pranayama techniques that help to balance not only the breath, but the brain. So the binaural beats is doing that by, it's called brain entrainment. So there's the external stimulus of the frequency, and the brain will respond to that by having synchronization in the hemispheres. Now, studies on long-term meditators have shown that that's what happens in the brain when you reach these deep meditative states, is that there is a hemispheric synchronization. So both sides are balanced. And so this technology, when I'm being kind of flippant and jokey, I say it's meditating for lazy people, which I can be one of for sure.
Yep, guilty.
Right? It's great, I think, to have all different kinds of
Yeah.
meditation practices. And, there's something to be said for sitting and focusing on the breath and really developing that discipline and that focus. And, sometimes we don't need to work so damn hard. I think that that's a cultural thing too. It's like, I have to work so hard all the time or it doesn't count. And it's like, that's what I love about Yoga Nidra and binaural beats. And then to put them together, it's like, no, rest back into this ancient technology and also our modern sound technology, like that can support you in getting to that place without effort. We need to take a break from efforting. That's not to say we shouldn't ever, of course, but balance. So the binaural beats brings us into that state. So combining that with the yoga nidra just helps us to go super deep. And one thing that I've noticed is that, so in yoga nidra, it's not uncommon that you fall asleep, even though, really the intention when you're practicing is to remain awake and aware. Sometimes we'll drift out, and that's fine. Really, I always trust the practice. So if somebody falls asleep, it's like, well, that's what you needed. You really needed to go down there into that deeper delta brainwave state. But because I'm monitoring what frequencies are coming in through the headphones, I don't usually bring it as far down as delta. I will, because that's a very healing state, but I'll do that towards the end. So because there's the external stimulus of, let's say, theta waves, well, we start with beta, then alpha, then theta, people can stay awake more when in the yoga nidra, I've noticed, when they have the binaural beats. So I think it's really helpful in that way. And then also it's just so relaxing, and there's so much potency that comes when we can relax.
Yeah, it sounds like the perfect combination of that ancient practice with modern technology and getting them to work together. And I think that is modern day yoga, is we live in a different world than when these things were practiced hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. So learning how to incorporate things that could benefit and make the practice even stronger is, work smarter, not harder, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been quite a journey. This particular offering, when I first came up with it, one of my teachers said, "Don't do it." He's an old school yogi, and said, "Just teach the yoga I taught you. You don't need to add anything." And I felt rejected. I felt that the idea was not good, so I put it away on a shelf. I also had no idea at the time about wireless headphones. Like, I couldn't figure out, how do you do this while you're moving, And then I moved to San Diego, and my friend from high school had started a silent disco company called Sound Off Entertainment. He called me and said, "Do you want to teach yoga, do vinyasa with headphones?" And I said, "No, but I want to do yoga nidra with headphones and binaural beats." He had no idea what yoga nidra was, no idea what binaural beats are. He actually thought they always went together. And I was like, "No, I think I'm the first person I know of. I don't know if I'm ever, like, in the whole world, the first person that did this, but new thing." And he said, "Sure, let's do it." And we tried it. And I was really nervous because of that initial feedback that I had gotten, but people love it. And it taught me a really big lesson about following your creative sparks, and that when we have innovative ideas, like, we will come up against people who can't see in that way, and it's not anything wrong. Like with my teacher, he's just in a different space. His life purpose is to teach a different thing, and he's doing an incredible job at it. He's a master. And perhaps my life purpose is to be a bit more innovative. And I think it's important to honor our lineages and this practice, that has been passed down for generations. And again, something I'm working with in my life right now is really shifting from an either or paradigm to a both and, because I find we live so much in either or. Either you honor the yoga or you create something new, right? Why can't we do both? I honor what has been passed down by all the gurus, and I add my own element to it, and it's both. Much more inclusive.
Yeah. I've done a sound off event, and
Yeah.
it was with Yoga After Dark Festival. And we did a really beautiful sunset rooftop yoga session. And it was the night of the recent eclipse and supermoon.
Wow.
So
Oh
it was
my
neat.
God.
We did a sunset. I led 2 classes. The first was a sunset facing the ocean in La Jolla. And then the second was facing the moon. We turned it around and we did the moon rising with the eclipse. And it was really powerful, and it was my first time teaching with the headphones as well. And of course it's restricting in some ways,
Yeah.
with the movements and such, but I did hear the feedback of it being, it's really powerful that the student can really feel like they're in kind of their own bubble with you. You're in their ear, but they're not hearing necessarily the student next to them. So in a way, it's a way for them to kind of stay in their own experience. So something different, but again, if you have an opportunity to try it as a student listening, or someone who hasn't had that experience, I think it's really unique, something to
It
try.
is. Yeah. And you're right. There are certain limitations in terms of movements. However, there's benefits that I've noticed. It can be such a calm and, I mean, in my case, I'm doing yoga nidra, so it ends up being this like trance-like experience, like a hypnotic flow. And really, yoga nidra is an ancient form of hypnosis. So, and that's a whole nother topic, I guess. I'm a clinical hypnotherapist as well, but it's yoga nidra that really brought me to that place. Um, yeah, but I love being creative, and I say let's embrace, let's move away from repressing and denying our creative urges. Let's embrace what wants to be birthed through us and together, because I certainly couldn't have done it without sound off. And you had this amazing experience with the moon and the sun. Like that sounds magical and potent.
It really was. It was, yeah, and it was an experience. It was something different. Am I going to teach every class that way? Probably not.
No,
But
yeah.
but it was something to try, and yeah, I was very thankful for the opportunity to work with, yeah, collaborating. This is something
Exactly.
that, yeah, I could have come up with on my own, but the fact that this festival was putting it together and people found that, it was just, yeah, really, really neat.
Yeah, I think that we're moving towards a real understanding, or maybe even a remembering of the need for and the value of collaboration. The age of the lone wolf is over. We need each other. We can make a bigger impact on the world when we collaborate, when we share our voices, just like we're doing right now. I feel so grateful to be doing this with you.
And I'm grateful for you to be here and to have met you through this experience.
Mhm.
I think that's one of the best things of launching this podcast. I'm such a curious person. I'm always wanting to learn and learn more. And the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know.
Of
I'm like,
course,
oh
right?
gosh, there's such a world out there of knowledge and wisdom. And yeah, but we're always forever students, teachers, students, learning from one another. Every student I have, I learn from. Every teacher I experience, I learn from. And yeah, it's really a beautiful, this information age. It's just, we have access, and considering generations before us and before smartphones were here, now you can look up any answer at any time to any question you have. So it's a
It's
beautiful
really
thing. Yeah.
it's a whole new world, and we in our generation are bridging. I remember the time when there was landlines and dial-up internet, before there was dial-up internet, and people who are growing up now don't have that. So it's a very interesting generation to be in, that we are being that bridge, and human consciousness is evolving right now very rapidly. And we can see, as things shift, there is instability, and we can see that happening on the global scale. And I know just from talking to my friends and my clients and students that there's a lot of internal fluctuations happening now for people, big transitionary moment in time.
Yeah, so speaking of this deep work that you do, and you work with people to sort of transform into their best self, their highest self, getting to that highest level of the subtle body, what do you find to be some of the greatest barriers? And I would love you to talk a little bit too about the hypnotherapy work that you do and how you sort of incorporate it with this yoga nidra and other healing modalities.
Yeah, so how do I incorporate it? That's interesting. Yoga Nidra is what led me to hypnotherapy because I had the intuition that, wow, this feels like some like similar to what I think hypnosis is. I want to explore this. And I really had no intention of becoming a hypnotherapist necessarily and like making that my life's work, but that's how the universe works sometimes. We get drawn to things and then it's like, oh, where have you been my whole life?
Yep.
So I have a practice as a hypnotherapist now, and I will incorporate yoga nidra into some sessions. And the hypnotherapy is distinctly different. In particular, I specialize in trauma hypnotherapy. And yeah, I love that you referenced the higher self. That's a big part of where I want to support people in tapping into. And there's really no becoming the higher self, because the higher self is within always. It's been traveling with us through lifetimes. So again, this is a really a practice of uncovering. It's being a human. We are so forgetful. Oh my goodness. I think that our spiritual practice and even our psychological evolution is really a lot about just remembering, and peeling away those layers. And you asked what gets in the way of people living from their higher self. I think it's all the old stories that we have accumulated. So before the age of 7, a child's brain is in the theta wave state pretty much all the time. So that's the hypnotic state. So everything that's happening before the age of 7 is being programmed and being template is being created for how to interact with the world. And this is done because it's done to save energy, right? Like, and when I learn how to walk, it's taking all of my consciousness and my energy to how do I move my body, and I have to hold on to this thing, right? That becomes relegated into the unconscious eventually, so that every time I walk now, I don't have to expend so much energy. And so that's very useful, right? Learning how to ride a bike or write my name and all this stuff. But we're also being templated with how to interact with other people. And most often than not, that's not always the most helpful template that we receive. And I think it's really important to note that, like, this isn't about blaming our parents or whatever for giving us negative beliefs. Our parents are doing the best that they can. And if they didn't learn certain things, if they were templated with some kind of trauma and didn't do their trauma work, well, it's going to be passed down. It's not, we all come upon this honestly. We're not trying to be harmful people. And yet, without consciousness, we act unconsciously and we project, and that's how we continue the suffering. And not only is it the things that happen to us, interpersonally, like with our caregivers or at school. Culturally, we receive a lot of programming. Boys receive this program that they're not allowed to cry. Girls receive this program that, good girls are seen, not heard, among many other like little phrases that we pick up, whether it's from somebody that we love telling us, or we see it on the playground, or we see it on TV. And one of my shamanic teachers says that she thinks everybody has some level of PTSD from living in a toxic culture, in a culture that denies the value of our emotions and our sensitivity, that pushes us to be independent, and there's some shame around needing other people. And so all that is under there. And I work with all range of people. Some of my clients are very successful. And so, you can be very highly functioning and still be sabotaging yourself. And when we kind of go underneath, whatever is causing an issue in your life right now is probably less to do with what's right in front of you and more to do with some conclusion and decision that you made long, long time ago that's then been reinforced over and over. And we will select and distort experiences um, to prove that. The ego always wants to be right. So the ego is going to create these situations. Like, let's say somebody has a belief that their needs are not valid because maybe somebody else in the family was suffering from illness or substance abuse issue, and so they took all the attention, and their needs were always at the forefront. So a child learns my needs aren't important, and so then starts to attract situations that reaffirm that, and maybe as an adult is attracted to unavailable partners because that will prove, oh, see, I knew it. I was right. My needs aren't important. This person can't meet me the way that I want to be met. Mm-hmm. So in order to really change that, we can't just do it from the conscious cognitive mind because it's deeper than that. And it's also really hard to change when we're tense. And hypnosis is essentially just a deep relaxation. It's like meditation with a goal. So we relax, and it's much easier to change when we're in a relaxed fluid state like water. This is how I describe the koshas, is similar to how I describe the levels of consciousness. The conscious mind, or even the body, right, is like ice. It's hard to make shifts in ice, but if you drop deeper into water and then air and ether and mist, right, you can make a lot more subtle changes much more easily. And then that tends to ripple out into the other layers of who we are.
Yes, it's so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And trauma, I think this is something I'm learning a lot about, that until you start learning, like you said, I think everyone has been traumatized at some point by something, by life experience. That's called being human. Now that I've started learning a little more about that from a teaching perspective, a teaching yoga, and the things, I've learned lately things that I was saying that I wouldn't have thought of because I hadn't experienced that trauma, but that have been brought up for me. For example, even saying the word fetal pose at the end of a yoga practice if someone has experienced a miscarriage. I hadn't thought of that because we hear fetal pose, this is this new beginning, but for someone else in that class that has had a miscarriage recently or in the past, that could be very traumatizing for them to hear. Yeah, just things that I hadn't thought of. So is there anything for, anyone listening that may be a yoga teacher or even another student in class that hears someone crying next to them, from your perspective on understanding trauma and allowing space for that? Is there anything you'd like to say about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that being sensitive to this is so important, right? And at the same time, we can never know what people are coming in with. I've been doing trauma work for several years, and I just led a Yoga Nidra teacher training a couple weekends ago. And this actually came up, and I learned something new, of like a new phraseology that could be triggering that I hadn't considered. It was related to military trauma, and I've worked with a few veterans, but I don't have like the most experience in that. So it was new to me. And it's great when we can receive this information and hold it compassionately. And at the same time, I think that as healers and teachers, we can never know what's going to trigger somebody. And ultimately, it's not our responsibility. A person's reaction is their own responsibility. And that's There's a part of me that's like, wow, that feels harsh. But it's actually a big part of my teaching because I also really specialize in codependency. So when we enable people, when we rescue people, we're not allowing them that space to find their own way out. That's not to say that we're not sensitive and that we don't compassionately hold space and offer, but triggers are doorways to healing. If we prevent people from having triggers, I'm not saying we should intentionally trigger people. I think that's irresponsible. But, if we're walking on eggshells around people, I mean, we're not speaking our authentic voice. And we're also maybe potentially robbing people of the ability to have something come up that's ready to come up. This is a delicate dance, it's a fine line. But I see this a lot in group work too, like when somebody's crying and then somebody next to them puts their hand on them. I actually had this experience. I was in Guatemala at a cacao ceremony with Keith Wilson, who's known as the chocolate shaman down in Guatemala at Lake Atitlan. And he does some deep inner child and some trauma processing work using cacao. And it was a group, and I was in a process, and I was crying, and somebody tried to rescue me because either my emotions made them uncomfortable or whatever, and touched me, and it took me out of my process. And it was a disservice to my healing because I needed to be in that, and I needed to find my way. I could feel the space that was being held for me by the group, and that was part of that. That was so powerful and necessary. But that person touching me because they felt uncomfortable with my expression of emotion was really a disservice. And I see that a lot when I run groups too, is people trying to rescue each other from emotions. And this is a cultural programming. Again, like I said, it's like emotions are considered so bad, and I think on our spiritual path, I think in our spiritual evolution, it's one of the kind of phases that we go through is a phase of spiritually bypassing where who doesn't love love and light? When you're in that shavasana and you're like touching the bliss of the universe, like who wouldn't want to stay there? But sometimes, on this path, we can get stuck there of like, and then we deny our human experience. Well, I don't get angry because that's not yogic. Or I don't feel jealousy because that would make me bad. No, that's called bypassing. That's called continuing your oppression. And that's going to become projected outwardly and cause more suffering for you and for other people. And again, I think that's a normal part of the process. I know I went through that too, where I, really enjoyed the spiritual aspect of my being and didn't really want to be a human, But I think that my deepest healing has come from allowing myself to sit in my humanity, in my emotions. And it's only through, if you can be with something, you can go beyond it. But what we resist will continue to persist. So my advice is for anybody that's like a teacher, or if you're in a group or a class where somebody is having an emotional experience and you feel that desire to take responsibility for them as a teacher, oh my gosh, I have to confront this all the time with myself. Like, they're not having an amazing class. Like, it must be about me. No, that's, again, just some limiting story that I'm still working through. It's like, no, they get to be responsible for their own experience. And my recommendation is, like, if something comes up for those of us who are watching that's a trigger, and that's a great inroad to our own exploration. Like, wow, like, what is it about this person's experience that is difficult for me, that I feel like I need to fix or control? So again, I think it's a both and situation. It's like, let's be both sensitive, right? We don't want to go triggering people by being really insensitive with our languaging. And yet we can also allow people the space to take responsibility for themselves. And we have to take responsibility for ourselves too. And knowing where that line is very important, and a constant process of learning. It is so nuanced. I've been working with this dynamic for several years now, and I still find myself taking responsibility for people, giving my responsibility away to other people, blaming people for how I feel is giving responsibility away. And I think this kind of mindset, again, it's cultural, it's deep in the collective consciousness. So I've never met one person that doesn't have this kind of dynamic. We have it at different levels, and there's always more layers of healing and levels of mastery.
That was beautiful. Perfect. And cacao, let's talk about that a little bit. So I was first introduced, I mean, it's funny, our backgrounds have so many crisscrosses. I studied shamanism, or I was introduced to shamanism in my Tantra yoga teacher training in Ecuador. So I did that, my 300-hour training with a school called Durga's Tiger School. I had the owner on the podcast earlier. But yeah, I was starting to get introduced to cacao down there, and so powerful. So for someone who maybe have heard, most people cacao, chocolate, they think of the chocolate bar on the shelf, but they've never maybe been introduced to the healing benefits in a ceremony, including cacao. So I'd love you to share a little more about what an experience with cacao might look, feel like, and do for someone listening.
Yeah, cacao. Oh, she's such a beautiful, gentle medicine. So cacao is considered a plant medicine. Often when we hear that phrase plant medicine, I know what comes to mind to people a lot is things like ayahuasca or peyote, and those are very intense plants. And cacao is very gentle. She's considered like a mother plant. And what Keith, my teacher down in Guatemala, says, he says like ayahuasca will grab you and drag you through the door to your healing. Cacao will guide you to the door, and then it's your choice whether you open that door or not. So it's super subtle. And basically what's happening is that cacao is activating our heart chakra. So it's actually increasing the blood flow to the heart. And it's doing a lot of things physiologically, like it affects our serotonin. It can be great to lift your mood. And it's also helping us to become more aware. Like there's like a subtle heightening of senses, and then energetically, it's working on our heart. It's helping us to feel if there's blocks in our hearts and to help our heart expand. So a cacao ceremony can be all kinds of things. And cacao was originally carried by the Aztecs and the Mayans as medicine. And they thought it was so valuable, they actually used it as currency. And the Mayans had a prediction that cacao will leave the rainforest when humanity needs to open their hearts. And so it's interesting that now we're seeing cacao ceremonies all over the place, and maybe we need to be more in the heart. But there's as far as I know, there is not any recorded information about what a cacao ceremony looked like from ancient times. So what that means is that we can be very creative in how we interact with this plant medicine. So there's a lot of cacao ceremonies that include ecstatic dance, just like cacao and dance, which is so great. It really helps you get into your body, which is what I love. There's yoga and cacao. And then I like to do emotional work, healing circles with cacao, and yoga nidra with cacao as well. And the experience can be so varied. You might be crying. It's gonna help you release. It's not as intense as the way we purge with other medicines, but yeah, crying is something that happens in cacao ceremony. Also laughing, also connecting and having deeper intimacy, deeper creativity and intuition. So it's like whatever you're showing up with, that's going to inform the experience. But it's gentle, it's beautiful. I mean, it's delicious. It's
Mm-hmm.
chocolate, It's bitter if you don't sweeten
Mm-hmm.
it. I mean, cacao is, I think, the most bitter substance that's like a natural substance on earth. Yet what she does for us is so sweet. She really takes us into that place of our hearts. And that's where so much healing comes from. And that's where so much wounding is too. So that's why I think it's a great um, kind of pathway into our healing.
Mm. I knew there was always a reason I love chocolate.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I think the
And
reason
my
I
body
give
does crave it,
chocolate.
It
Yeah,
does.
it's healthy for us.
Going darker. The darker, the better.
Darker the
Right?
better.
Less
Yeah.
sugar. We don't need that sugar. But I think I found my sweet spot is like the 70. I think I have an 88% bar right now. And so good. But that was what was so fun in Ecuador because they had so many sources to explore different chocolate. And I had the most amazing cacao coffee massage. It was on the edge of the rainforest. It was
Hi.
just magic, magic. But yeah, it was fun to be able to try the different variations and the different percentages to kind of find what that sweet spot was. And yeah, for me, it's like a little square of like an 88% dark chocolate as a treat. Boom. Good.
Yeah, gives you a little lift. And it connects us to the earth. And what I love is that cacao comes from a tree. So I always think of that because I can always use more grounding. So she helps us to ground.
Such beautiful information for everyone listening. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and the things that you've learned along the way and that you're seeing work for people that you're working with right now. So it's really, really amazing. Thank you.
So fun to share. I mean, what's the point of accumulating all of these experiences, right? If we're not going to share it out. Again, like the lone wolf is done. Let's pool all of our resources. So I know, and I can just geek out on this kind of stuff forever. I love healing and I love heart medicine. So I just really appreciate the opportunity to connect with you and your heart and have this heart-centered conversation.
So if there's a 10-minute thing anyone listening right now could do at home, what's one thing you recommend people try?
Dance party every morning. For sure.
I
I
love
know
that.
people have a morning routine, and often we want it to include meditation. Meditation is really hard if we haven't cleared energy first. So, what I've been doing lately is putting on my favorite jams and just dancing. And I live alone, so I don't have to worry about anybody looking at me, or have that kind of insecurity. But I just let it loose. Shaking, vibrating the body is so important to discharge surface tension and even emotional energy. Once you do that, and then you can just easily drop into that meditative state because your channel's been cleared. And we can do asana to get to that place too. I find dancing for me more fun and efficient. Um, Asana still takes a lot of discipline for me. And that's important for me too. But the dancing, it brings a lot of joy in the morning, and then it sets the stage for being able to sit and meditate. Otherwise, I don't know that I would really do it.
I love it. And that's so interesting. Again, with these paths crossing, the 10-minute tip for my school director from Ecuador was to dance. And we did a lot of dancing. And I remember I came back from my 300 hour and I did what we did many times before going into our Tantra yoga, which is a very still practice, restorative. In a way, yeah, there is movement, but we're going in and out of that shavasana. And we would start many times dancing, or if we were going into a workshop or going into sitting for long periods, we'd start putting on music and just dancing, and sometimes dancing with one another or by ourselves. And I was teaching in one of our vinyasa studios by the beach, and I turned on a song. I was like, all right, everyone dance. And I swear everyone looked at me like, are you crazy? This is yoga. We don't dance in yoga. I'm like, come on, everyone, just let go. You could close your eyes if you want. Don't look in the mirror. Turn the other way. Who cares? It's one song. When's the last time you just gave yourself permission to dance?
Yeah, in my teacher training a couple weekends ago, I realized, oh, I forgot to do the dancing. Maybe that's why the energy felt a little low, when you're like 3 days in and I'm like, put it on the music and only a couple people got up. It's so interesting, and I've definitely had quite a journey with my relationship with dance, and used to be very uncomfortable moving my body without being told how to move my body. And I mean, we could talk for an hour just on that one sentence, right? So we won't go too far into that, but yeah, I think we all need to dance more. And I just was at a training in Mexico with a couple of shamans. Same thing. They made us dance all the time. They also made us take a nap after lunch. I've never been in a training where they like require quiet time. It was brilliant.
Yeah.
It was so great.
Oh, I lived in Spain for a while where siesta was way of life, and it was
Yeah.
beautiful. I'm like, oh man, yes, adults being told it's okay to nap. This is amazing.
Right. So yoga nidra is like our permission slip, I think, if because it can be hard in this world to be like, okay, I'm going to take a nap, but to come to a 2 p.m. yoga nidra class, it's like, okay, I'm going in yoga nidra, or I'm going to yoga, I'm being productive, and oh wow, you get to rest too. So
We all need more. We do.
we do. Yeah.
So finally, in honor of the show title, Yoga for Balance, what does balance look like, feel like? What is balance to you?
Hmm. Such a good question. I think I touched on it a little earlier in this balance that we want to find between effort and surrender, and that's such a yogic concept, and I can't remember the Sanskrit terms for that in the moment, but for me, balance is really about letting myself off the hook some days. Like I don't have to perform all the time. I don't have to be productive all the time. In fact, what is productive? Resting is sometimes more productive than what we think we need to be doing. And on the same token, then I've had periods where I give myself too much rest and too much leeway. And it's like, okay, Katya, you have to be a little bit more disciplined now. And in the hypnotherapy work that I've done there's a lot of inner child healing. So I've really developed my inner mother and in terms of reparenting myself. And I've noticed that my inner mother loves to nurture and tell me to take a nap and take a bath and like, oh, you don't have to do that. You've worked so hard. You're such a good girl. And so lately I'm like, all right, I need to develop my inner father, that masculine energy of like, you've rested, it's time to do these actions, right? That balance of feminine, masculine energy within my own self, which is the balance of effort and action with more rest and surrender and flow. And it's a constant process. I mean, balance is the nature of balance. If you think about like, if you took a platform on a ball, right, you would need to move slightly from side to side in order to maintain that balance. Balance is not a static position. It's a constant slight movement. So I think that in itself takes a load off me. It's like, okay, I'm still negotiating my balance. And I'm doing all right.
Yep. Is there anything else before we sign off that you would like to share?
Yeah, well, I feel really excited about something that is upcoming. There's a 3-day event that's still kind of like a new creation. So we talked about, that value of really putting it all out there with these new ideas. And we're not sure how it's going to be received, but we actually did, my co-therapist, one of my best friends who studies hypnotherapy with me, she comes down here and we did this event in October. It's called Let Go and Live Free. So it's in Encinitas. It's a non-residential retreat. And I just want to invite anybody that's listening to this that may have found interest in any of the things we've talked about in terms of like these stories that keep us small or these patterns and the sabotage and finding that relaxation in order to access the higher self. We've created this group process that that just fast tracks that. And I love my individual work. It is so potent. And yet there's something, as you know, that happens in group. There's an alchemy that happens. And I'm so excited about this kind of new frontier of my work. So yeah, I just wanted to share that, the Let Go and Live Free weekend, to dive deeper into some of this stuff. And that's coming up in May.
Where can listeners find you online? Or
Awesome.
anywhere else?
Yeah, Katya Lovejoy is my name. So I'm on Instagram and Facebook under my name. And then KatyaLovejoy.com. You can find all the different offerings that I do. And if you're feeling called, if you're feeling that heart call to the retreat, that's letgolivefreeweekend.com. And yeah, I love connecting with people. So whatever way that happens, I welcome it. And I really, really feel so grateful, Heather, for this opportunity, not only to connect with you, but everybody that's listening to this. You hold such a beautiful space for us sitting right in front of each other here, but also, I can feel the energy that you're holding for your listeners. So it's been such an honor and a gift to be here with you. Thank you.
The honor is all mine. I'm humble, grateful for you to be here, grateful for Mandy for connecting us, and thank you for all of the work that you're doing, for following this path, for following your curiosity, for doing this work that isn't always easy, holding that space that isn't always easy to hold, and helping people to find this transformation and healing and to rediscover their inner highest self that's always been there. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, what a powerful episode and such an inspiration speaking to and learning from Katya Lovejoy. Thank you so much again, Katya, for being on the show. And thank you at home or in your car, wherever you're listening. Thank you for listening to the show. Don't forget to subscribe to Yoga for Balance wherever you listen, and help our show grow by leaving a star rating and review while you're there. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode and look forward. We have a lot of great interviews lined up for the upcoming weeks and months, and so much great information to share with you regarding these different styles of yoga, different healing modalities, and more as we dive deep into the yogic path. Thank yourself for taking the time to soak up this information, to possibly learn a little something new. And I thank you again for being here. Namaste, and until next time.